The United States of America has begun preparing the battlefield for an amphibious landing on the coast of Iran in the Strait of Hormuz. And it's not just experts and analysts talking about this anymore, but also United States military personnel. For the 8th night in a row, US aircraft have been bombing southern Iran, but now they are not targeting generic military targets. They are methodically striking bridges, railways, and tunnels, cutting off Iran's giant main port, Bandar Abbas, from the rest of the country. This is a city of 500,000 people through which more than half of Iran's trade passes and where the main naval base of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is located on the Strait of Hormuz. It has already been almost completely isolated, and now the main question arises, why cut it off? Why cut off all land routes to the port on the coast if you are not planning to take this port? And here is proof that this is no longer just speculation. A retired 4-star US Army general stated directly that isolating the Hormuz Strait has always been part of the US plan, which is why you see the destruction of bridges, railways, and tunnels. And on the water in the Hormuz Strait, the 11th US Marine Expeditionary Unit is already stationed. And against this backdrop, we also have tragic news, because for the first time since March, Iran has killed American soldiers. 2 were killed, 1 is missing, and this raises the intensity of the war even more. In this episode, why the geography of the strikes actually reveals preparations for a landing operation, what forces the US has brought into the region, what happened to the American soldiers who were killed, and where all of this is heading. My name is Alexi Pecci, let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this YouTube channel. We're moving towards 300,000 subscribers, so I would personally appreciate your subscription. So let's go through everything step by step. First, about the deaths of the American soldiers, because this very event is already being called a turning point in this war. They say it might actually force the American president to go for a certain escalation. And is it to take revenge? And now the US Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, is even hinting at this, saying that those losses were not in vain and now Americans are obliged to avenge the deaths of these soldiers, which means escalating the situation. In the region, US Central Command officially announced that on the night of July 17 in Jordan, 2 American servicemen were killed and another went missing. These are the first US combat losses from Iranian fire since March. 4 more were evacuated to Jordanian hospitals and have already been discharged. Some personnel received minor injuries and have already returned to duty, but the United States base in Jordan sustained truly significant damage. What exactly happened? Iran struck the Muwafaq Salti air base in Jordan with at least 2 ballistic missiles where American troops and fighter jets are stationed. Videos on social media are already showing the moment of impact and thick smoke. Plus, satellite images have already appeared online which really show the destruction. By the way, subscribe to my Telegram channel Pecci News. The link is in the description of this video. That's where we post such materials. In general, over the past week, American forces at bases, specifically in Jordan, have been hit by as many as 4 Iranian missile strikes. It has already been reported that dozens of servicemen have been wounded to varying degrees and several helicopters have been destroyed. Helicopters. Moreover, American analysts are now noting that Americans have started losing their Black Hawk helicopters at a high rate. And this war has shown that they really turned out to be very vulnerable to such attacks. And indeed, now the Iranians have also published photos of the aftermath of missile strikes on a US Air Force warehouse at Al Udeid Air Base. This is already in Qatar. And at the same time, the US Embassy in Jordan is urgently urging Americans to refrain from traveling to the international airport in Amman due to a specific, concrete, and credible threat. In addition, US citizens are advised not to visit the port in Aqaba until further notice. And now I'll quote the State Department's statement. Continue to follow all safety instructions from the Jordanian authorities. US Embassy in Amman. It continues to advise all Americans to avoid traveling to military bases in Jordan. Well, overall, the situation is that the Iranians have started to strike Jordan very aggressively, because before this they were shelling Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and even Oman. But Jordan kind of stayed on the sidelines. So, according to American media, these are Iranian missile strikes on American military bases in Jordan in recent days have led to the loss of a significant number of Sikorsky Black Hawk military helicopters. This was reported by the New York Times. According to the publication, the most devastating strike was on the Prince Hassan base in eastern Jordan. The publication does not specify the exact number of helicopters lost, but it is worth noting that the cost of one such helicopter is $21 million. That means Jordan is under attack. It's been a week already, but now there are soldiers who have died, and this topic has started to be discussed more specifically and officially. In total, according to official Pentagon data, there have been 16 American soldiers killed since February during the entire war, and more than 430 wounded. Trump's reaction was surprisingly restrained. On News Nation he said, quote, "It's very sad. We don't want things like this to happen. This is service to our country." But when he was asked about Iran's statement that it would no longer abide by the June ceasefire memorandum, Trump said he no longer cares about what they say in Tehran at all. After all, from now on, the US is no longer going to even talk to the current Iranian regime. Overall, I would say that Trump hasn't been very talkative about Iran in the past week. It's possible that his advisors have finally gotten through to him so that he doesn't announce for the 40th time that he has already won. By the way, this is not a joke, in case you missed it. Analysts have calculated that since the beginning of the war on February 28, Trump has already declared 39 times that the United States of America has already won this war or has defeated Iran. And then once again we have an escalation. But it was the American troops who responded to the deaths of the American soldiers. On the night leading into Saturday, for the 8th night in a row, the US launched a new wave of strikes, according to the Central Command's statement, to swiftly punish the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps for the killing of Americans. And against this backdrop, there are more and more signs that Donald Trump is staying silent for a reason. The United States of America is clearly planning something, and it's something big. Take a look at the pattern of the strikes on Iran in recent days, because it's very specific. Analyzing the American campaign around the Iranian port of Bandar Abbas, I come to the conclusion that the United States of America is preparing the battlefield. In other words, this is battlefield preparation. The United States of America is striking roads, bridges, railways, and tunnels, and also striking communications infrastructure around the city. And this raises the question of whether this campaign is preparing the ground for a limited ground operation. I emphasize limited. A bit later I will explain why, and specifically I want to emphasize this word. For example, the day before, the United States of America did not strike the bridges. Instead, they simply destroyed the tunnel that connected the port city of Bandar Abbas with the road to Tehran. Let's pause here and analyze the logic a bit. Over the past few nights, the United States has struck several bridges. In particular, the Kahuris-Kahuristan Bridge on the Bandar Abbas-Kamirlar Highway. The Geriv Bridge, the Abnama Bridge near Minab, that's right on the coast. Plus the railway junction to the west of Bandar Abbas. Plus there were strikes on the tunnels and roads to Radan and Qajiabad. So, if you look closely at the map, the strikes are being carried out in such a way as to isolate Bandar Abbas from several directions at once, not just to damage individual targets there. That is, if before the Americans mainly struck the sites from which, for example, missiles were launched, where radars were located, and so on, now it is clearly visible that this is an attempt to isolate the city. And disabling the railway doesn't just disrupt civilian container transport, for example. It deprives Tehran of the ability to transfer heavy military equipment and ammunition to the south, to the Strait of Hormuz. And now the answer to the question of why exactly this Iranian port is being cut off. The Hill publication quotes a retired 4-star US Army general, and here is his quote. The isolation of the Strait of Hormuz has always been part of the US plan. That's why you see the bridges being destroyed. We don't want them to be able to come in, strengthen their logistics, and start restoring the capabilities that we are taking away from them. Now that's the language of preparing territory for capture. Well, or for a landing operation. First, you cut off the enemy's reinforcement supply routes. You weaken them as much as possible. You pin down the remaining forces there and then move in yourself. And here is direct confirmation of the presence of landing forces in the region when ensuring a naval blockade. According to the U.S. Army Central Command, Marines from the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit already boarded the tanker Wen Yao in the Gulf of Oman a couple of days ago. And it is precisely the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit that is ready for an amphibious landing, a marine unit that is already in place off the Iranian coast. So the logic suggests itself. Bandar Abbas is the headquarters of the Iranian Navy. More than 85% of the goods that come to Iran by sea pass through this port. And it is from this base that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps strikes at ships and projects its power into the Persian Gulf. If the US wants to really physically control the Strait of Hormuz, they need to take either this coastline or the islands in the strait. Strikes are already happening on the islands, by the way. There are reports of 8 strikes near the village of Maysan on Keshem Island and of a damaged substation on Kish Island. That is, there is a total sweep of the entire coastal zone and the islands in the Strait of Hormuz. But here there may still be doubts about how realistic a full-scale US landing operation in Iran is. Let's count the available forces in the region. And what does the US have in the region for such a hypothetical operation? First of all, that very 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit. This is roughly the equivalent of a brigade, that is, about 2,000 Marines with equipment on amphibious ships. Secondly, according to some estimates, units of the 82nd Airborne Division of the US Army could be deployed in the region. Thirdly, there are also 2 aircraft carriers stationed there, Gerald Ford and Abraham Lincoln. There are also dozens of fighter jets there, including recently deployed additional F-35s and F-16s, plus dozens of refueling aircraft. And here is the sober conclusion from all of this. Even if the US does launch a ground operation, it will be limited. Because 2 expeditionary units of Marines, that's basically 2 brigades, if that's easier to understand for us, and elements of 1 airborne division. That's enough to capture and hold a coastline, a port, an airport, or islands in the Hormuz Strait. But that's nowhere near enough for an invasion deep into a country of 90 million people. No. We're talking about controlling a narrow coastal strip along the Hormuz Strait to physically guarantee the passage of ships, not a march on Tehran. No, there definitely won't be a big war like that. So that's a fundamental difference, but it seems that this is exactly the scenario the US is preparing for. On the other hand, in the end, there might not be a ground operation at all. The isolation of the port of Bandar Abbas serves a dual purpose. It both prepares the ground for a possible amphibious landing, and by itself it chokes Iranian military logistics at the Strait of Hormuz without any landing at all. That is, Trump may be keeping both options open for himself. If he wants, he can choke them from a distance with new airstrikes and missile strikes. If he wants, he can land troops and take control of the coast. But the very fact that the 11th Marine Unit is off the coast of Iran and bridges are now collapsing one after another clearly indicates that something serious is brewing. These are no longer just routine strikes, this is clearly preparation for something bigger. As for the scale of destruction in Bandar Abbas itself, the situation is already catastrophic for Iran. The Telegraph describes it like this. Before dawn, the bridges began to fall one after another. American missiles turned them into piles of concrete in riverbeds and gorges. A city of 500,000 people, which handles about half of all Iranian trade, is now almost completely cut off. And in Hormozgan province, according to the deputy governor, an American missile destroyed a desalination plant, which means that even the water supply for people is now under threat. At this point, the question of evacuating the population from this region has arisen. But it should be understood that Iran's response is also expanding. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps stated that with a combined missile and drone operation, they stopped 4 ships from passing through the Hormuz Strait in the past 24 hours. For the first time, Iran, as you know, struck an American base in Syria and continues to strike Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Oman, and Jordan. But by the way, not everyone in the region is thrilled with Donald Trump's plans, or at least they pretend not to be. The United Arab Emirates, a key US partner in the Persian Gulf, has actually called for an end to this war. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Emirates called on all parties to exercise maximum restraint to avoid further escalation and to immediately cease all hostilities. But the strongest part of their statement is this, quote, "Striking civilian infrastructure and civilian facilities in the region, including schools, universities, hospitals, desalination plants, energy facilities, transportation hubs, and residential areas, is a flagrant and serious violation of the international order, and it cannot be accepted or justified under any circumstances." Here is this list of targets from the Emirates, and to be honest, this is why both sides are striking now. Well, the US is striking Iranian bridges, tunnels, railways, and, if we believe the Iranian authorities, a desalination plant. All of these can be called dual-use targets, so to speak. Iran is also striking a Kuwaiti desalination plant. So the question here is who started it first, right? That is, first Iran struck the desalination plant in Kuwait, and then a strike was carried out on the desalination plant in Iran. And so the Emirates are basically telling both sides that they're crossing the line. You're already targeting the vital infrastructure that supports the lives of civilians. On the other hand, it will clearly be easier for the Emirates to breathe if the threat from the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is finally eliminated. Subtitles. Let's sum up. As of the evening of July 19th, the situation is as follows, and finally, it looks logical. The United States of America has been bombing southern Iran for the 8th night in a row, but not at random. They are surgically isolating the main port and the naval base of Bandar Abbas by cutting off bridges, tunnels, and railways. And now a retired US general is openly explaining that this is being done so that the enemy cannot bring up reserves to what is being taken from them. The 11th US Marine Landing Unit is already stationed off the coast. And all of this together are classic signs of preparing a coastal landing operation with the goal of taking physical control of the Hormuz Strait. Will there actually be a landing? Maybe not, because the port can be isolated even without such a landing, and if there is one, it will be limited. That is, the coast, the port, the islands, but clearly not some march towards Tehran. This means the available forces can only support an operation near the Strait of Hormuz. But one thing can be said for sure. Something more serious is brewing, clearly more serious than anything that has happened in this war so far. That's why I would recommend not just following the news about this war in the Middle East, but paying close attention specifically to the fate of the port of Bandar Abbas and this entire coastal area. If the Americans completely destroy all the logistics leading from Bandar Abbas inland and landing ships appear off the coast, it will mean that the US is moving from isolation to seizing and controlling territories. And then the war between America and Iran will reach a completely new level. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. Follow me on Telegram. The Peachy News channel link is in this video's description, along with links to all social networks. And if you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so with any donation using the links and details also in the description of this video. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.